Listen to this. A singing, cleaning woman. A leaf says, "Sweethearts, don't pick me, for I'm busy doing God's work. I am lowering my veins and roots like ropes, with buckets tied to them into the earth's deep lake. I am drawing water that I offer like a rose to the sky. I am a singing, cleaning woman, dusting all the shelves in the air with my elegant green rags. I have a heart. I can know happiness like you." Isn't that exquisite? I mean, if you ever wanted to feel one with nature, that is such a prayer. I have a heart. I can feel happiness like you. I'm doing what I was created to do. I absolutely adore that. I adore that. I adore something for you to use. I absolutely adore that. The microcosmic. How can you think that even I don't have a place on this earth? I'm cleaning your air. Isn't that exquisite? And that is the mystical perspective. A singing, cleaning woman. The subject tonight is love. I adore this book. I adore it. There isn't a thing you've ever given me that I'm not madly in love with. Not a thing. You know me all too well. You know, I thought change happens in the blink of an eye. And we are at a very critical, extraordinary point in the history of the evolution of humanity. So I thought that I would speak about that as we enter into the subject this weekend. I would take that entryway. Because one question that every single person is asking, well, I think it's more than one, but it begins with one, is what is the meaning of this chaos? What is going on? What is going on? What is my place in all of this? How will it affect me? Because we know it will. How do I respond? How do I respond so that I don't panic? How do I best interpret and understand the perspective? So what I want you to picture is that you are in a type of building. And from every floor, you're going to get a different perspective. So there's the penthouse suite. And from that perspective, you get an enormous overview. And if you're on the lower level, you get another view if you're on the ground level. And on the ground level is the most isolating, the most limited, and the most panic-driven. It's the street level. And if you're on the penthouse, I remember one time visiting a friend of mine in Manhattan, and Manhattan is a very loud city, as all of you know. It is very loud. And I think it's 100 million times as loud as, well, it's typical of all cities like Hong Kong or all crowded cities with tall buildings where the sound is contained. It's not like Chicago, where there's more airspace, you know. So when you're in Manhattan and all the cars are just always screaming at each other, the cars are continually screaming. It's like 24 hours a day. You feel like your ears are going to burst. So when you are in silence in New York, you hear that silence. I mean, you actually hear the silence. You are so aware of it. And I visited a friend of mine who lives in a penthouse, top floor. I don't know if you'd call it a penthouse. She lives on the top, and she's got a small, treasured balcony. You know, where you walk out, a deck. And I don't know what floor she's on. I have no idea. 20th, who knows. whatever, it's the top of the building with a deck. And here's the point. When we went out there, you couldn't hear any of the sound. You were out of the pressure, and you actually could feel a subtle shift in the pressure from being out of the tightness of the buildings to on the deck and away from the noise. You actually couldn't hear it. And the difference in not being oppressed by the influence of chaos versus being controlled by the influence and the weight and the density of chaos within the same building, i.e. within the same experience, is a phenomenal reality. Everybody in the building is in the same reality. And now I'm going to say the building is you. And depending on what floor you choose to see the experience through, will determine whether you are oppressed by the reality of it or whether you can observe it in silence from a penthouse. And from that position of silence from a penthouse, you get an overview, and in that overview, you get a perspective that allows you to discern symbolically, i.e., with mystical consciousness, or the consciousness of a mystic through mystical reasoning. What is happening in the evolution of humanity? What is happening now is not unexpected. It was never unexpected. What's taken us by surprise is our unpreparedness. It's not that the changes in the evolution is uncharted. We are in uncharted waters in how the changes are expressing themselves. And perhaps in our inability to properly prepare ourselves. But that we are entering the shift from the split of ages to holism is something we've been talking about for decades. That it has finally hit a level of the collective economy, the collective geography, the collective politics, that it has finally gone from the control of the holistic clinics to lambasting the global economy is simply shocking you. And yet at the same time, you've been a student of what is one is in the whole for decades. You just didn't think it would hit your bank account. So the unpreparedness is you. And the naivete of not realizing and not really believing the laws, the mystical laws of the universe. What is in one is indeed in the whole. You cannot have holism simply be a clinical principle in a holistic laboratory or spa. You cannot say what is in one is in the whole and have that apply to your nutrition or to your health habits and not think it isn't going to absolutely hit the political interactions on our planet, the social, the climatic, the geographic, the financial markets. How can it be otherwise? You cannot say micro and macro and practice it you practice it conveniently and then be hit with a shock wave when you see it hit the markets. You should be awestruck by God when this happens, but not in shock, but rather from the point of view of, wow. Wow! Everything I believed is real. I'm looking at what's in one is in the hole, and it is hitting heavy duty. Instead of saying, what do you think's going on here? You know exactly what's going on. You know, you are the ones who should know what's going on of all people. What have you been studying? You, of all people, should know exactly what's going on. The question we should actually be asking ourselves, you as students of mysticism, as students of the laws of mysticism, should be asking yourself, how now do I respond? How do I work with this? How do I act so that I don't drop to the level of panic and fear? Because I should have seen this coming. What was I thinking? For what reason are you studying this all this time with teachers screaming? Screaming. Why are you trying to become conscious? Of what are you trying to be? You were working to become conscious of the laws of the universe so that you can use them. So that you can spot them working the cosmos. So that you could see them in action. So that you could realize they are in charge. They are in charge. They are absolutely in charge. But the advantage of being able to read archetypally, to see what's actually going on. Now, if somebody asked me, all right, give me your story with this, how would I tell the story of what's going on now? How would I do that? And from a larger point of view, starting how I see it through the world according to Garp, this is the world according to Carolyn. And I emphasize that because it is the world according to Carolyn. This is how Carolyn sees this. And I have to say that, so I'm going to take you into my head, because this is how it works for me. From my point of view, you know how I have taught you. We're going to go how I've said, as we've learned about since I've been teaching how we can become too caught up in our need to have reasons for why things happen as they do. And that's just a small part. But we're going to track that back to the beginning of the Enlightenment. So let's go backwards a bit. Let's go backwards. You're here with me because I developed a passionate interest in mystical consciousness, in the role of learning to perceive rather than think, to be able to, I should say, to be able to perceive as well as think, to be able to blend mystical reasoning with the best of your intellectual skills. People like Gandhi did that. People like Martin Luther King Jr. did that. People like Mandela did that. People like, I believe, Einstein did that. They took I think Abraham Lincoln. These people took the best of their intellect and they merged it with interior skills that could only be listed as mystical capacities to see beyond the ordinary, to see and envision what an ordinary human being could not envision, and to hold that vision and use the best of their intellects to scaffold a way to get there. And to be able to, and they had to rely on their mystical instincts and the profound stamina of their soul to maintain a vision where other people would challenge that vision and bring it down. This is what all of these people, and many like them, Sadat, many great people had in common, whose vision, what they shared in their vision, is that their vision always was to better humanity. And that is a signature of the soul of a mystic. Their vision, their passion, is always to better the life of others and even one other. To better the life of another. And the reason you need a passionate faith, a passionate trust, is because the obstacles of chaos are great. They are great. Because you're bringing in the new against the old. You're bringing in the new. And to take you just to the lower level of your building, just bringing in new furniture into an old apartment is difficult. The obstacles of an old carpet and bad rotting, what do you call that stuff? Wallpaper. And getting that off. The chaos of getting the old out so that the new can come in. Even that hardcore chaos is difficult. But the chaos of facing the force of other human beings who recognize that a new vision will change their way, and especially when in their gut they know that new vision contains changes that are essential and inevitable, they will fight you. And you're seeing that now in our country. As what Barack Obama represents versus the old guard. The old guard. I mean, as many of you know, I love the study of war. I think the study of the military and the study of war has given me a perspective on the study of evil and the study of why we are predatorial, why we have this need, this compulsion to destroy and destroy and destroy. And we simply can't stop. We simply, as a species, cannot stop taking from the other, destroying, killing. There is something in us. And I think about when I look sometimes at the way things are happening in our world. The war that comes to mind the most is World War I and the Western Front. And how the Western Front came to be. When I look at, for example, our Congress and Senate, and I look at Obama and how his vision, because he, to me, has the elements of the mystic. He has what I'm talking to you about. The visionary. with the best of a refined intellect, confronting an old world, when I say to you what's going on now, that is getting dismantled, and it's not just America. It is a global dismantling that we are living in. And I want you to see it clearly. I want you to see it through your penthouse soul. I want you to see it clearly. So in World War I, one of the reasons the loss of death was such a bloodbath, was that it was the first time weapons advanced to a automatic level. They were howitzers and these huge, huge weapons that just shot millions of shells, millions of bombs. And the first time weapons flew, they introduced the airplane, the Red Baron, and all of these characters, mythic characters, legendary rather. And they had machine guns and rapid fire weapons, but the generals and the strategists were trained at a time when they had the cavalry, when they didn't have weapons like that. They were trained in strategies from a different era with different weapons. And so all they knew was how to march the men across, how to line them up and say, forward. Just march right into that. So all these young men were ordered to march across a field with automatic weapons. And they dropped dead. They murdered hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions, because they would not, out of sheer stubbornness, recognize that their time was over as generals, that the world had advanced past their capacity to be leaders, that it was time for them to take their toys and go home. That in fact the problems now and the challenges facing the world in 1914, 15, 16, 17 had advanced beyond their strategic maps in their head that they were trained at in 1860, in 1870, when sending in the cavalry was still the strong arm of the military. Well, sending in horses against howitzers proved to be more than ineffective. And sending in horses against mustard gas and barbed wire proved to be more than ineffective. And so they built ditches, long, long ditches, stretching from one end of France to the other. And the soldiers sat and rotted and rotted and rotted for years. Some of them as close as I am to some of you in this audience. And they picked up their heads and on occasion fired a gun to each other and then lowered their heads and died of trench foot, which is where that came from. Trench foot. Because they could not recognize that the strategies were now completely out of touch with where the problems had advanced. So now let's talk about where we are now, and I want you to see it from the penthouse. What I learned I'm going to say this differently. As a result of discovering Teresa of Avila, teaching her work, and all that has opened up from that, which is my understanding of healing and a mystical perspective blended with archetypes, blended with healing, blended with where we're going in this particular workshop together, into what it is to defy gravity, to go even more deeply into the powers of your soul, into the capacities, I should say that, of your soul. What I've come to realize is that Teresa lived at the ending time period of the, to say it differently, she lived at the beginning of the Enlightenment and the end of what we'd call the Dark Ages. Now that's a very critical turning point in Europe. Very critical turning point. Because as the Enlightenment, we call the Enlightenment was a time they call the light comes in. And what they meant by the light was that the intellect was given reign over a very different way that humanity thought in Europe. And the way it was before the Enlightenment was a far more, it wasn't that there weren't intellectuals, because there were superb intellectuals. They had Peter Abelard, and they had extraordinary, they had Aquinas, they had an intellectual culture. But it was sporadic, and it wasn't inventive in the same way. It wasn't scientific in the same way. But once the Enlightenment kicked in, it became it penetrated in a way, it became mainstream. And the superstitious mind that was fearful of the church began slowly to take a back seat. And the reasoning, rational, logical mind began to gain more and more ground as the idea of science and the whole idea that there was a reason for all things as they happened. There was a reason. That reason could solve everything. And this is the important part that I need to take, the piece that I'm going to put in front of us. That is, you want to highlight that reason could solve everything. That we could find a way through all problems. We could reason our way through all problems. So, of this discussion about the Enlightenment, I need to take this critical piece, that we could reason our way through everything, no matter what happens. We could find a way, or no matter what happens, we could fabricate a reason for why it happened, which is the shadow side of that. We could fabricate, we could make people believe that this is the reason why things happened as they did, which is the shadow use of reason. So, as the centuries went by, on the positive side, we had an adoration of reason and a great quest. Science advanced, medicine, astrology evolved into the more sophisticated science, major league of astronomy, all kinds of advances. And then we came to the quantum shift and the signal that the age of enlightenment, oddly enough, in the language of the divine paradox, irony, the way God plays with the universe and plays with us. Enlightenment, light, and I'm going to take that word and put it in front of you. And I want you to circle the word light. A quantum light. The beginning of the nuclear age. Which, of course, was Oppenheimer. And without a doubt, we were always going to evolve into the nuclear age. Madame Curie and radium. I mean, we could say that, but we'll leave Madame Curie and the discoverer of radium over there, uranium over there. But let's say the splitting, I want to go with weaponry. The fact is we entered into the nuclear age formally, the weapon of mass destruction age. We entered into the age with the conscious intention to destroy life, to kill, once again, to kill. Enlightenment. We took this light, the light that was created by splitting atoms, and we said kill. We infused it with a consciousness of death. Now we could have, that moment could have been born with light, because as we know, nuclear power is also a life-giving force. But what we did was, on its birth date, on its descent to earth, we said kill. And we celebrated it. We said, well done us. Well done us. Now, you're still in the penthouse. You must see all things symbolically to stay in this altitude. It is very, very easy when you are looking at historic events or any event, personal or macro or micro, to quickly take the elevator down to a personal floor, to quickly pull out personal facts, to quickly take a position on the personal front, and to say, well, you don't understand my. And as soon as you put the word my in front of an event, you've lost your footing. To which I would say, now you've lost your ability to see clearly, and I have to send you back to the kitchen to peel potatoes, as Teresa of Avila would say. You've now lost your capacity to hold a position of what Buddha would say, impersonal. The impersonal position.